it changes the way that you are, the way you perceive. How do we take what we're learning here out into the world?
My guest today is one of our professors, Dr. Jack Lapsley. Dr. Lapsley is an associate professor of Old Testament. Recently, she taught a course at our farminary. Jack, tell us a little bit about that course. It sounds fascinating.
Right, so Nate Stuckey, who is the director of the farminary, and I taught this course together at the farminary. And the idea behind it was to have an engaged, hands-on learning experience with our hands in the dirt at the farminary. And while we were doing that, read Old Testament texts that are talking about creation, about the land, about our relationship to the land. And so Nate invited me to do this with him. And I was very upfront with him that I was happy to, help him think about the texts and help students think about the texts, but that I knew absolutely nothing about growing anything. And so with that understanding, he said, that's okay, I'm on the growing side. And so I was happy to go into that course with him. It was great.
So you were literally teaching with dirt in your hands.
We were. With the structure of it, it was just a 1-hour course. So we only met 6 times during the semester for 2 hours in a block. And for 1 hour, we would talk about the texts. So we had primary readings from the Bible, and then some secondary readings of folks, both ancient interpreters and modern interpreters, who have read those texts in a way that's enlightening for us to think about in terms of the land. And then the second hour, we would go out and we would farm. We would put our hands in the dirt.
How is it that this course was enhanced by not being in a traditional classroom?
So in a number of ways. The first I would say is when you are reading, let's say Genesis 2:15, about human beings are put on the land to serve and preserve the land. That's what it says there. It's what human beings are for. When you're doing that and there's like sweat rolling off your brow and your hands are filthy and you're putting carrot seeds in the ground and your knees hurt, it feels really, really different from just sitting in a classroom going, yep, serve and preserve, So that was powerful, and not just for me. I mean, it was for me, but it was powerful for other students as well. And then also I think the thing that happens at the farminary, it changes at least for me, it changed the relationship between me and my students. So when you're working alongside of other people, planting things, weeding, you're on your knees, you talk about the texts, you talk about vocational issues. There were many students in the class who had a lot of experience with farming. Some came from farming families. And again, that's the place where I'm not an expert in those things. And so it was a great leveler in a way that was, I think, beneficial for everyone's learning. We're all learning from each other, and the kinds of conversations that you can have are just different when you're engaged in those kinds of work together. So students called me, we're out on the farm, they called me Captain Jack. They didn't call me Dr. Lapsley.
Wow.
And that was great. That was terrific.
Well, Captain Jack, invite us into one of these classes. Tell us what the conversations were like. What kinds of questions did the students ask?
So a lot of their questions pertain to how does what we're doing here, that is reading these texts and thinking about them and farming, and how do we take what we're learning here out into the world? They're definitely forward thinking in terms of, how is this going to shape my ministry? How do I help others see the world differently in the way that I'm coming to see the world differently? So they had very practical questions and also deep vocational questions. Some of them, as I mentioned, came from farming backgrounds, but often they were industrial farming backgrounds. So those students articulated a tension between the world they had come from and the kinds of ways of seeing, ways of being in the world that we were talking about that have to do with sustainability and having a relationship, a theological relationship with the land in a new way than they had ever seen before in industrial agriculture. So they had a lot of kind of existential questions as well as practical questions. And when you're sitting around a table in a classroom and just reading the text, you can kind of have an almost romantic view. And actually, farming at the Farminary, it's pretty hard to have a romantic view if you spend much time at all out there, which is good. It's good. It's much more realistic.